Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our series, The Soul's Path Home, Divine Wisdom on Death and Beyond, where we continue to reflect on the stages of human existence from the perspective of the Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. May God's peace and blessings be upon all of them. For these last 2 days of our Ramadan Reflection series for 2025, we want to conclude by focusing on not the deceased loved ones that we have lost, but rather how we can cope and bear with the loss. Today being the 29th day, for some in the world, today will be your last fast, with tomorrow bringing with it the day of Eid al-Fitr. For others, they will be fasting 30 days. In either case, we all follow and fulfill our local obligations based on local moon sightings, rather than resorting to moon fightings. May Allah accept our fasting, charity, seeking of knowledge, prayers, supplications, recitation of the Quran, and all the other goodness we have engaged in this past month and sent ahead for our grave life. Now, coming to the topic for today, and which we will continue and conclude with tomorrow, how do we navigate the delicate balance of grieving and consoling, while at the same time having patience and realizing that Allah does what He wishes, and that ultimately we have no say in the matter. We have to submit and live according to how we have to live. Now, in our tradition of Islam and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, may God's peace and blessings be upon all of them, mourning is not merely an expression of sorrow, but a means of spiritual connection and remembrance, as long as we do it within limits and by following the rules of the religion. We believe, brothers and sisters, in giving the deceased their due rights through our grief, as exemplified by the noble Ahlul Bayt, may God's peace and blessings be upon them, and their mourning practices. This act of remembrance keeps their legacy alive and serves as a reminder of their sacrifices. However, we must also be mindful of striking a balance between grieving and maintaining our faith in Allah's divine plan and decree. Our immaculate and divinely appointed Imams, may God's peace and blessings be upon all of them, have taught us that while expressing sorrow is natural and permissible, we must not forget that death is an inevitable path and an inevitable part of Allah's decree. We're reminded of this in the noble Quran every time. For example, in chapter 3, verse 185, Allah says, "Every soul shall taste death." Let's reflect on a beautiful hadith as we move on in our discussion for today. When the brother of Ash'ath ibn Qais left the world, the commander of the faithful, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, may God's peace and blessings be upon both of them, went to see him and offer his condolences and said to him, "If you grieve, you have fulfilled the right of the man," meaning your brother. "And if you're patient, you have fulfilled the right of Allah. Yet if you are patient, the decree will pass over you while you are praiseworthy. And if you excessively grieve, the decree will pass over you while you are blameworthy." Now this hadith, brothers and sisters, conveys Imam Ali's wisdom, peace be upon him, on how to respond to the loss of a loved one. He advises that while grief is a natural human response, patience is the higher virtue that fulfills one's duty to Allah. The Imam emphasizes that Allah's decree will come to pass regardless of what we do or say. But our reaction determines whether we'll be praised or blamed for the response to that trial. So it's up to us on how we want to respond and react. I would say this, that we need to strive to find an equilibrium between honoring our dearly departed loved ones and submitting to Allah's will with patience and understanding. This balance will allow us to fulfill our emotional and spiritual needs which are very much important in Islam, while respecting the boundaries set by our faith. It's through this balanced approach that we can truly embody the teachings of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon all of them, and find solace in times of loss. Now for today, I actually wanted to review the ruling and the etiquette of mourning. Ayatullah Sistani, may Allah preserve and protect him, has an entire section in his 4-volume Islamic Laws Manual, which is not available in English. So I wanted to speak about that today. Now he begins by stating that it's recommended to weep for a deceased believer. But it's advisably cautious, he says, not to raise one's voice too much while crying for the deceased. Thus, right off the bat, we're expected to maintain balance and not become too emotional, reminding ourselves that death is the inevitable path we all must take. Yes, it's true, I get it, that would be in a time of grief, but we cannot let our emotions get the best of us. This is the most crucial time that we need to ensure that we retain our composure. Remember the teachings of our faith. What good is our religion and faith teachings if they're only used when times are good? He goes on to state that it is recommended to offer condolences to the bereaved before or after the burial, express sympathy and invite them to patience. This is more so emphasized after the burial. However, the Sayyid maintains, if much time has passed and offering condolences would remind them of their grief, then it's better to refrain from that. Now, our communities all commemorate the death of a family and friends in different ways. However, one clear ruling is where Ayatullah Sistani notes that in mourning ceremonies, it's necessary to avoid extravagance, wastefulness, and actions contrary to the religious law. There's no need to boast of one's wealth and to arrange an elaborate dinner function at a banquet hall for a funeral and invite thousands and thousands of people. Rather than spending that excess, it may be better to provide those funds to the needy people in your own family or your community or the society and improve the lives of others with the intention that Allah grant the reward of those good deeds to the deceased. One of the interesting rulings that Sayyid Sistani brings up is that it is actually recommended for the person who has died that before they die, they write in their will that a portion of the 1/3 of their property should be spent to feed people in their own mourning ceremony. If the deceased has willed for feeding from the 1/3 of their property in their will, then we have to act upon that will. This means that rather than the community or the jamaat or the family paying to feed people in that majlis, in that mourning ceremony, or as some people have done, they simply send money overseas to feed people, he opines that it is recommended to feed people in their own mourning ceremony. Now there's definitely a deep wisdom in this if we stop and reflect on it for today. How about the family, however? How are we expected to take care of them in this time of difficulty? Well, we're told that it is recommended to send food to the family of the deceased for up to 3 days. They shouldn't have to worry about cooking all these other things. Rather, the family, the friends, the community at large needs to provide for them for up to 3 days, noting that it is disliked to eat food with them or in their house. In other words, give them their space to grieve and be together. That's not a time for a program or a sit-down session, as we see on many of our community events when people pass away. Now this is actually based on a hadith from our 6th Imam, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, where he's quoted as having said, "Eating food with the members of the family of the deceased is one of the actions of the people of Jahiliyyah, the period before the coming of the Prophet. However," he says, "the way of Islam is that food should be sent to their house, just as the Prophet did after the passing away of Jafar ibn Abi Talib." Now in the last portion of his religious guidance, His Eminence Ayatollah Sistani gives some very important guidelines I want to share before I conclude today. Number 1, it's appropriate to hold mourning ceremonies and memorial services with simplicity, avoiding imposing heavy expenses on the bereaved family that would cause them hardship and usually have no religious benefit to it. In today's fast-paced world, brothers and sisters, it's essential to remember the Islamic principle of simplicity of life, in mourning ceremonies especially. Sadly, some of our own Muslim cultures actually do the opposite. They're expected to host a lavish after-burial program borrow money if they can't afford it, and spend money they don't have just to show the community that they too can follow backwards cultural practices. We need to slowly break such cultural practices and return back to the true teachings of Islam as taught by Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Remember, the essence of mourning lies in remembrance and spiritual reflection, not in financial burdens, social pressures, or good food. By embracing simplicity, we honor both our departed and our living community members. Moving on, His Eminence Ayatullah Sistani goes on to say that it's appropriate for believers to follow the way and the method of the noble Prophet. May Allah bless him and his family, and the immaculate Imams. May God's peace and blessings be upon all of them, and our Islamic ethical guidelines. They should practice moderation and economic moderation. And even those who are wealthy should also observe moderation in such ceremonies, so that those who are not well off don't feel burdened by these common customs. Especially, he says, if these ceremonies are for worldly competition and showing off, they'll never bring the reward for the living or the dead. Now, in our modern context, it's crucial to remember the importance of moderation in mourning practices. Let me give you 2 practical tips as we continue and we try to conclude in today's Ramadan reflections. Number 1 is we need to prioritize simplicity in funeral arrangements, focusing on spiritual aspects rather than extravagant displays of pomp and pageantry. Number 2, we should consider donating to charity in the deceased's name instead of spending excessively on the ceremonies. Hopefully these guidelines, if we can follow them, we'll be able to maintain the essence of our traditions while adapting to contemporary circumstances, ensuring that our cultural practices today remain true to the Islamic principles and are accessible to all believers. Lastly, His Eminence Ayatullah Sistani notes the following. He says that overall, promoting a culture of holding mourning ceremonies in a light, simple, unpretentious manner, far from formalities, extravagance, and waste, and directing the participants' attention more to death and the Day of Judgment can bring about positive effects for society and the community. In our contemporary society, it's crucial to refocus our mourning practices on the spiritual essence rather than the material extravagance. Remember, brothers and sisters, a truly impactful mourning ceremony is one that softens the hearts, increases the taqwa of the participants, the God consciousness, and inspires positive change in the community. By focusing on these aspects and much more, we can create meaningful, spiritually enriching experiences that honor both the deceased and our Islamic principles. May Allah grant us the ability to follow the guidance of our Marja Taqleed in everything that we do, and including in that the commemorative programs we hold to honor our deceased. We conclude here. We return tomorrow with our 30th and final video for the month of Ramadan for 2025. However, I want to wrap up and just thank you all who have reached to this point in our series, and to remind you that we will conclude on the day of Eid with a final message. So even if tomorrow is your day of Eid, please stay tuned the day after tomorrow and take time to listen to our Eid message to round up this discussion. Until then, brothers and sisters, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.